Yarden Ross is coming. To our seminar, are you joking? Celia Whitlow nearly dropped the mug of burnt conference room coffee she was holding, her fingers tightening around the paper cup as she stared at her boss like she'd just suggested they'd landed a spaceship on the hotel roof. No joke. Her boss, Meredith, didn't look up from her tablet. The original speaker canceled. Apparently, Yarden was in town for meetings and he agreed to fill in. His assistant just confirmed, Celia blinked. Like, Yarden Ross, CEO of Ross Tech, that Yarden, the billionaire, yes. Try to keep your jaw off the floor when you introduce him. You're still doing the opening. Celia's stomach sank. Wait me, you're the lead coordinator. That's your job. And just like that, 26-year-old Celia Whitlow, underpaid event organizer, found herself standing backstage of the Marquette Hotel's massive ballroom, clutching a microphone and rehearsing the name of the man who had his own Wikipedia page. She'd seen his face on magazine covers, business articles, and a 2-page spread in Forbes that was still taped to her roommate's fridge. He ran one of the most powerful tech companies in the country, had never been married, and was rumored to fly to Paris for dinner on a whim. And now he was standing 5 feet behind her. She could feel him before she saw him. Calm, tall, quiet power. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The air shifted the moment he walked in. When she turned, her breath caught. He wore a black tailored suit that fit like it had been cut for him yesterday, charcoal shirt, no tie, and a watch that probably cost more than her student loans. His eyes were sharp and unreadable, a deep, stormy gray, and he was studying her with an expression she couldn't place. You must be Celia, he said, voice low and smooth as velvet. How did he know her name? Yes, Celia Whitlow. She shook his hand, hoping he didn't notice hers was shaking. Thank you for stepping in last minute, she added quickly, trying to look professional even though her face was probably tomato red. I like surprises. His lips lifted slightly. And I'm curious what you'll say when you introduce me. Something charming, she said before she could stop herself. His eyebrows lifted, amused. I'm counting on it. She managed to get through the introduction without fainting, though her heart practically beat out of her chest the entire time. As she walked off the stage and he took her place, she thought she'd never see him again. She was wrong. After the seminar ended, she was helping the team tear down the signage when a voice behind her made her spin. Celia. She turned and nearly tripped over a tangled mic cord. Yarden stood there, holding 2 coffee cups from the cafe downstairs. I figured you might need one, he said, handing her the cup. Thank you. I liked how you introduced me, he added, sipping his coffee. You didn't list my net worth first, she laughed, surprised. I figured you'd hear that enough. Thought I'd try something different, I noticed. There was a pause. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, she said before she could stop herself, then flushed. I mean, I know what you meant, he tilted his head. Are you free for dinner? Celia opened her mouth, then closed it. I'm not asking as a CEO, he said. I'm asking as a man who finds you interesting, she blinked. You just met me, I know. That's insane. Maybe, but I don't do normal. She hesitated a beat longer than her lips curved. All right, but I'm not wearing heels. Dinner wasn't just dinner. He didn't take her to a regular restaurant. He took her to the rooftop of the most exclusive steakhouse in the city, private dining, soft jazz, skyline view. A waiter brought out a custom menu with their names printed on it. She stared at it, stunned. You do this for all women you meet at seminars, she asked, trying to sound casual. Only the ones who make me feel like I've been sleepwalking until they spoke. She dropped her fork. Yarden didn't look away. She studied him for a moment. Are you always this intense? Only when I mean it. Their dinner lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything childhood, books, why she hated elevators, why he hated birthdays. He didn't ask her about her salary or where she wanted to be in 5 years. He asked what made her laugh. What made her furious? What she'd do if she had nothing to lose. By the time the dessert came, it didn't feel like a first date. It felt like something she'd been waiting for without knowing it. When he walked her to her apartment building, he didn't kiss her. I want to, he said softly, brushing a curl from her cheek. But if I do, I won't stop thinking about it all night. She stared up at him, heart pounding. Then kiss me. His lips met hers and everything else faded. The next morning her phone rang. It was Meredith, frantic. "Celia, Yarden Ross just called and asked for you to help coordinate his upcoming product gala in New York. He said, and I quote, 'She's the only one I'll work with.' What did you do?" Celia stared out the window, dazed, her fingers still tingling from where he'd held her hand. She whispered, almost to herself, "I think I met someone who's going to change everything." The driver opened the rear door of the Bentley as Celia stepped onto the curb outside the Ross Tech headquarters in Tribeca. She'd barely slept. A private jet had flown her in that morning, and she still wasn't convinced it wasn't some elaborate prank. But the driver had known her name, the flight had been underwritten by Ross Tech, and her phone now had a temporary assistant handling her inbox. The glass tower in front of her shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun, its mirrored surface swallowing the sky. Inside, the lobby was quiet, pristine, and intimidating in its scale. A concierge in a dark gray suit guided her to the executive elevator without needing to ask her business. On the 39th floor, the doors opened to a suite of windows and steel, offices with minimalist furniture, and a view that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of the world. A woman with a coiled braid and a clipboard greeted her in a tone that was polite but brisk. "Mr. Ross is finishing a call. He asked that you wait in his private lounge." Celia followed, trying not to stare at the artwork lining the hallway pieces she recognized from documentaries and auction catalogs. The lounge was more home than office. Dark wood leather seating and a long wall of books behind glass. A tray waited on the table with fresh fruit, a pitcher of infused water, and a single envelope with her name written in deliberate looping script. She opened it. "Celia, if you're reading this, it means you didn't run." "Good. I'll be 5 minutes. Make yourself at home, and don't touch the chess set unless you intend to finish the game." The chess set was behind her. She hadn't noticed it before ivory and obsidian pieces mid-match on a marble board. When Yarden finally walked in, he wasn't in a suit. He wore a slate blue shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers. No one had announced him, and he didn't bother with small talk. "You flew well. I've never been offered fresh croissants on a plane before. I told them to make it memorable." She stepped toward the window, drawn to the skyline. "Why me? I needed someone who could run the gala with precision. And I wanted someone I could trust not to fawn." "You don't know I won't." He moved beside her. "You haven't yet." She glanced at him. "I'm not easily impressed." His eyes flicked to hers. "Neither am I." They stood in silence, the city sprawling out beneath them. "I hate events like this," he said finally. "You're hosting it. I have to. Investors expect spectacle. The board expects headlines. I expect to be quietly miserable by dessert. Then why do it? Because I built something worth celebrating. And because sometimes when you bring the right people together, something unexpected happens." He turned to her fully now. "You're going to run this event, but you're not just a coordinator. You'll have full creative control budget, design, guest experience. I want it to feel like something alive, not another cold display of money." "That's not a small ask. I'm not offering a small challenge." She folded her arms. "And you think I'm qualified because I held a microphone once. I think you're qualified because you didn't blink when I asked you to dinner, because you listened instead of performing, and because I trust my instincts." She studied him. "Do you always get what you want?" "No. But I always go after it." 3 days later, Celia stood in the middle of a ballroom that looked nothing like a ballroom. The gala was still 3 weeks away, but her vision had already transformed the space. Massive renderings lined the walls, showcasing a reinvention of Ross Tech's identity: sleek, artistic, human. The lighting team had begun testing different ambient tones, and a florist was assembling sample arrangements that looked more like sculptures than bouquets. Yarden dropped by unannounced that afternoon, walking in with his sleeves rolled and a quiet intensity that made everyone around him slightly sharper, slightly more alert. "You're building a world," he said as he walked beside her. "That was the idea. I didn't expect it to feel this personal. I didn't expect you to leave me alone long enough to do it," she said, glancing at him. "I wanted to see what you'd create without interruption." She gestured to a corner display. That installation over there. It's based on one of your earliest patents. Most people won't recognize it, but those who do will understand it's the beginning of your empire. He looked at her then, really looked. You dug into the patents. I wanted to understand the origin, not the press version. The real one. He was quiet for a moment. Most people think I just got lucky. You didn't. You say that like you know. I do. That night, he took her to an art show in Brooklyn, nothing official, nothing curated. A private warehouse space filled with raw canvases, neon sculptures, and live music. They drank wine out of paper cups and danced beneath string lights. He didn't introduce her to anyone. He didn't need to. They were just two people lost in something rare. Afterward, they walked along the East River, the wind catching her hair as he laced his fingers with hers. I don't usually share my time like this, he said. I don't usually let men hold my hand after 2 dates. Are we counting? We're somewhere between a rooftop dinner and a warehouse rave. Feels like it deserves a number. He stopped walking. Celia, she looked up. This isn't temporary for me, her breath hitched. Yarden, I don't want to wait weeks to see how this plays out. I want to know if you're willing to risk something real. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what this is yet, she said softly. But I know I don't want to walk away from it. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. That's enough for now. They didn't speak again as they walked. They didn't need to, but something had shifted, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Celia stood at the back of the gallery hall, her arms crossed as the final lighting test cast glowing indigo shadows across the sculpted centerpiece. The gala was only 4 days away, and Ross Tech's flagship event looked more like an immersive art installation than a corporate launch. But what kept her pulse humming wasn't the logistics or the $1 million floral arrangements flown in from Amsterdam. It was the way Yarden had stopped treating her like a contractor and started looking at her like something that mattered. He hadn't said the word relationship. He didn't need to. The shift had been quiet but unmistakable. The way he lingered during walkthroughs, how his gaze would search for her in a crowded room, or how he'd started calling her late at night just to hear the sound of her thoughts. She hadn't told anyone. Not even her roommate, who was too busy gushing over Celia's sudden rise to the top to notice her silence when Yarden's name came up. But now, standing beneath a canopy of suspended glass shapes that would glow during the opening speech, Celia's phone vibrated. A message from the Ross Tech security lead. Mr. Ross requested your presence at the penthouse. Immediate. When she arrived, the elevator already knew her floor. The penthouse wasn't just an apartment, it was a world suspended above the noise. Panoramic windows framed the city like a silent movie, and the walls were covered in modern pieces that didn't scream wealth but whispered intention. Yarden stood in the open kitchen, sleeves rolled, pouring something into a tumbler. You drink scotch now, Celia walked in, unzipping her coat. It's tea, I'm not a masochist. He handed her a matching cup. Chamomile, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't. I noticed. She took a sip, watching him set the kettle aside. You didn't call me here to discuss my caffeine intake. No, he said. I called you here because tomorrow everything changes. She leaned against the marble island. Define everything. He walked around to face her, resting his palms on the counter. Tomorrow, my company announces a merger with Viron Systems. It's going to make headlines for weeks. The board's been fighting over it for months. It'll double our global presence and shift the market. Congratulations, she said slowly. But why are you telling me this now? Because when the news breaks, every reporter is going to dig. They're going to look at the gala, the people I surround myself with, the ones I trust. And you're not invisible anymore, Celia, she blinked. Are you warning me? I'm preparing you. I've been in this world long enough to know what happens when someone unexpected walks into it. They don't ask how good you are, they ask what you want. She set the cup down. And you think I want something? I think you don't realize what you've stepped into. Then tell me, she challenged. Tell me what I've stepped into. He met her gaze, face unreadable. Me, silence hung between them. You think I'm afraid of that? She asked. I think you should be. Why? Because I'm not safe, because I don't do halfway, and because once I fall for something, I don't let go. Her breath caught sharp and involuntary. "You're not saying this because of the merger," she said. "You're saying this because you've already decided." "I decided the night you told me not to count the dates," she exhaled, stepping closer. "Then don't protect me from the fallout, walk into it with me." He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into the drawer behind him and pulled out a small velvet box. "I wasn't going to do this until after the gala," he said, "but I don't want the world to define you before I do." Her heartbeat stilled. "Yarden." He opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a silver pendant shaped like two overlapping constellations. He lifted it gently, looping it around her neck. "It's not a promise," he said. "It's a declaration." She touched it, fingers trembling. "Of what?" "That I see you, not as a symbol, not as an accessory, but as the one person who didn't flinch." Celia closed her eyes. When she opened them, she whispered, "Then let them look, let them dig, I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, after she returned to her hotel suite, she found a package waiting at the concierge desk. No card, no note. Inside was a gown, midnight blue silk, custom fitted, one of a kind. The designer's name stitched into the lining, alongside it, a pair of heels that looked like sculpture. And tucked inside the box, a folder stamped with Ross Tech's logo. Inside the folder, a formal contract. Her new title: Director of Experiential Strategy, full executive privileges, salary that made her breath stall, but beneath the contract, a handwritten line on Ross Tech letterhead. "This isn't a reward, it's recognition. Say yes or say nothing, I'll know." Celia stared at the paper, then at the dress. She didn't say anything, but the next morning she showed up at the gala headquarters at 6 a.m., wearing the pendant around her neck, and when Yarden walked in, she didn't hesitate. "I'll need a full team brief by noon," she said. "And I want Viron's CEO seated 3 chairs to your right." "Not beside you. Let them wonder." He smiled, but said nothing. She didn't need him to. Something irreversible had begun. The gala unfolded like a dream carved in light. Celia stood just inside the entrance of the transformed venue, a decommissioned train station bathed in amber brilliance. Every surface shimmered with intention. Projected constellations drifted lazily across the domed ceiling. Suspended kinetic sculptures shifted with the air, each piece echoing a moment from Ross Tech's legacy. Guests filed in through scented corridors of resin and white citrus, their reactions a mix of awe and disbelief. She didn't wear the pendant. She wore it tucked inside the lining of her gown, close to her skin, where no one could see but she could feel. Yarden hadn't arrived yet. He was due for a press appearance downstairs before ascending to deliver his keynote. Celia had refused to participate in that portion. The press could wait. She had things to finish: final adjustments to the lighting cues, a last-minute seating rearrangement for a senator who'd brought the wrong guest, a missing champagne crate rerouted to the wrong vendor. She handled each one with a calm precision that surprised even the most seasoned staff. "Miss Whitlow," said a man in a black tuxedo, his headset nestled behind one ear. "They're asking for you in the projection pit, the ambient loop skipping." She crossed the room, heels silent on the polished floor. "Tell them to replace the 4th file in the loop with the backup from the test run. It's a codec issue, and ask them not to panic. That tends to make it worse." By the time she returned to the main atrium, the crowd had tripled. Celebrities, economists, venture capitalists, world-renowned designers, every guest looked like they belonged in a different universe, yet stood in collective reverence beneath the thick velvet sky of her design. The hum of power filled the air, but it didn't feel cold. It felt alive. At exactly 8:20, the spotlight shifted. Yarden stepped onto the stage. Celia stayed in the shadows, watching. He wore a midnight suit, crisp white shirt, and no tie. His presence didn't demand silence, it invited it. When he spoke, the room leaned in. "This company began in a garage," he said. "Not the kind with nostalgia attached, the kind that leaked in the rain and had no insulation. It was never about money, it was about vision, about creating something that didn't exist. Tonight isn't just about a merger or a milestone. It's about the people who saw beyond what was and built what could be." He paused. "And one of those people is responsible for this very night." Celia froze. She built this experience. She saw this space as a possibility, not a limitation. And she reminded us that technology isn't just about advancement, it's about connection. Her name is Celia Whitlow. A soft murmur swept the room. Celia didn't move, he looked directly toward her. "Celia, come up here," someone behind her nudged gently, then another. She stepped forward, the spotlight following. Her gown whispered around her ankles as she ascended the steps. The stage lights made it hard to see, but she could feel every pair of eyes in the room. Yarden didn't look away from her. "She didn't ask for recognition," he said. "But some things demand to be seen." She stood beside him, unsure what to say. He leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I meant what I said in the penthouse. I'm not letting go." Her voice caught in her throat. "Then say it." He turned back to the crowd. "I don't usually make personal declarations publicly," he said, "but tonight isn't usual. And this woman changed more than this event. She changed me." A ripple of audible surprise passed through the audience. He took her hand. "I filled in at a seminar because I was bored. I stayed because I met someone who challenged me, who never tried to impress me but left me stunned anyway. I didn't expect to fall in love with the woman holding the mic." Celia's eyes stung. "Yarden," she whispered, "are you really doing this in front of the entire tech world?" He faced her fully. "I could buy every screen in Times Square and still not say it loud enough." He dropped to one knee. The room went utterly still. From his pocket, he pulled a small platinum ring. Not flashy, not enormous, just quietly stunning, like everything else he did when it mattered. "You already turned my world into something I want to live inside. Will you keep building it with me?" Her voice shook. "You didn't even ask. I'm asking now." "Yes," the word echoed. The crowd erupted, but none of it touched her. Not really. All she knew was the feel of his arms around her as he stood, the warmth of his breath near her ear as he whispered, "I was afraid you'd run." She pressed her forehead against his. "I would have if you hadn't made me brave." Later, much later, when the speeches were done and the champagne had run dry and the guests had disappeared into the night, Celia and Yarden stood alone in the now silent hall. The lights were dimmed. The constellations still moved across the ceiling in slow arcs. He took her hand and pulled her into the center of the room, his other hand settling softly at her waist. "There's no music," she murmured. "I don't need music to know I'm dancing with the woman I'll spend the rest of my life with." She rested her head against his shoulder. "You're not the man who filled in at a seminar anymore." He tilted his head toward hers. "And you're not the woman who introduced me." They danced alone in the dark, just the two of them, beneath the galaxy they had created together. And for the first time in his life, Yarden Ross didn't feel like a man who had everything. He felt like a man who'd finally found the one thing he never knew he was missing. Celia stood barefoot on the stone terrace of Yarden's coastal estate in Montauk, the Atlantic stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. Sunrise painted the sky in strokes of lavender and gold. She wrapped his shirt tighter around her body, the fabric still warm from where he had worn it hours earlier. Inside, the house was still. They'd arrived late the night before, after escaping the whirlwind aftermath of the gala, not a driver, chef, or assistant in sight, just them. Yarden had insisted. "One weekend," he'd said, "where we disappear and remember how to breathe." Her fingers traced the smooth railing as the breeze tangled her hair. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of things unspoken, the kind of peace that only came after the noise had settled. Behind her, bare footsteps padded across the wide, planked floor. "You always wake before the sun." Yarden's voice carried the rasp of sleep, "only when I'm too happy to stay asleep." He came to stand behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "I kept thinking you'd vanish. I thought you didn't believe in fear. I believe in risk, and you were the biggest one I've ever taken." She leaned back against him. "I was never going anywhere. I just needed to make sure I wasn't being absorbed into your life. I wanted us to build something new together." He pressed a kiss to the side of her head. "You built something that made me want to live slower. You know that." She turned in his arms, her gaze lifting to his. "Then let's make it permanent." Yarden blinked, caught off guard. "Are you proposing to me, Celia Whitlow?" She lifted a brow. "I'm challenging you again." His laugh was low and real. "You're impossible. And you're in love with me," madly. They kissed, slow and certain. Later that morning, they drove down to a hidden stretch of beach tucked beneath the cliffs. No photographers, no security detail, just a canvas bag with fruit, a bottle of chilled elderflower lemonade, and a blanket they spread out on the sand. Celia wore a loose linen dress, her feet buried in the warm grains as she watched Yarden sketch something in the corner of a notebook. "You never mentioned you could draw." "I can't, really. I just needed to map something out." She leaned over to see. It wasn't a drawing, it was a layout. Rooms. Light angles, a garden, a studio with floor-to-ceiling windows facing east. "What is this?" "Our house," he said simply. "Not one I've bought, one I want us to design together." Her breath caught. He pointed at a corner. "That's where you'll keep your books, and that space over there. That's for the things you haven't discovered you love yet." She swallowed hard. "You don't do halfway." "No, and I don't want temporary with you." Back in the city, the world hadn't stopped spinning. The merger went public, headlines screamed, stock prices soared, but something had changed. Yarden no longer walked into meetings with the weight of silence behind him. He brought her, not as decoration, not as a symbol. As a partner, at an investor dinner, one of the board members leaned toward Celia beneath the flickering candlelight. "We didn't expect you to last," he said with a smile too tight to be kind. "But it seems you've become a fixture." She didn't flinch. "Fixtures don't design new wings of the company. Check tomorrow's internal memo." Yarden didn't intervene. He didn't need to. She handled herself like she always had, with clarity and edge. They navigated the next months together quietly, intentionally. He taught her how to fly a small plane over the Hudson. She taught him how to slow dance in a grocery store aisle while waiting for fresh bread. They traveled to Kyoto in spring and bought hand-painted tiles from a woman who only spoke in metaphor. They adopted an elderly golden retriever that refused to sleep anywhere but between them. On a crisp October morning, they went to the courthouse. No press, no guests. Just them, dressed in navy and ivory, hands clasped tight. Celia carried a single white calla lily. Yarden wore a cufflink with her initials engraved inside. Afterward, they held a small dinner in the garden of their new home, still under construction. But enough was finished to laugh by firelight and toast with people who mattered. Meredith came, wearing a velvet blazer and pretending not to cry when Yarden raised his glass and said, "I didn't know I was waiting for her until she spoke my name." Celia's mother, who had once worried her daughter would vanish into someone else's shadow, pulled her aside afterward. "He looks at you like you built the stars," she said. "I did," Celia replied, her voice soft but certain. "At least his." Their home rose slowly, built with cedar and light. Celia filled it with moments. Handwritten notes tucked in coat pockets, impromptu dinners under fairy lights, morning races to the mailbox barefoot in the snow. One evening, curled on the sofa with Yarden's head in her lap and the dog snoring at their feet, she reached for a sketchbook. "What are you drawing?" he asked, a new idea. "For the company, for us." He turned his head to look up at her. "Tell me, it's a retreat, a place for women like I was, creators, planners, people with too much talent and too little opportunity. We give them space, resources, and time to build." His eyes lit with something fierce. "Let's do it," she smiled. "I already started the paperwork." He sat up, kissed her shoulder. "Of course you did." They didn't need grand declarations anymore. They were the quiet kind of permanent. The kind that held hands in silence and knew it meant everything. On their first anniversary, Yarden gave Celia a small box. Inside was the same silver pendant, the constellations now embedded with two tiny sapphires where the stars intersected. "Still not a promise," he whispered. She looked up at him, heart full. "No, but a life." They stood beneath the same galaxy they once danced under, the sky wide and waiting, and for the first time they didn't need to imagine what came next. They were already living it together.